You've probably heard the story of Abraham and the three visitors 100 times, right? It's one of those classic Sunday school lessons. But what if I told you that hidden inside this familiar story is something incredible? A kind of prophetic movie trailer for the entire story of salvation. Well, today we're going to peel back the layers and see it in a whole new light. Now, to really get into this, we need to be in the right headspace. So let's start with this verse. It's a reminder that we're not just here to read the words on a page, but to really meditate on them, to look for the deeper connections. And that's exactly what we're about to do with Genesis 18. So here's our game plan. First, we'll do a quick flyby of the story itself, the divine visit, and Abraham's famous plea for Sodom. Then, and this is where it gets really interesting, we're going to dive into the hidden meanings, the mystery of some flower, how this whole chapter works as a prophecy, and finally, who this seed that saves really is. Okay, let's dive in. Picture the scene. Abraham is just sitting by his tent trying to escape the blazing afternoon heat near the oaks of Mamre. It seems like just another ordinary day, but it's about to become anything but. Abraham looks up, and bam, three men are just there. And his reaction is immediate. He doesn't wait, he doesn't hesitate, he runs to them, bows, and insists on showing them hospitality. And we're not talking about a few crackers and some water. He pulls out all the stops, preparing an incredible feast. He even tells Sarah to use 3 measures of the finest flour. Now tuck that little detail away because it's going to be a huge deal later on. So as they're eating, one of the visitors, who, by the way, is the Lord himself, drops this absolute bombshell. He looks at Abraham and says that in exactly 1 year, his wife Sarah, who is way, way past the age of having children, is going to have a son. And guess who's listening from just inside the tent? Sarah. And she laughs. Not out loud, but to herself. You can just imagine her thinking, yeah, right. A worn-out woman like me, and my husband is ancient? But the Lord hears her silent thought and calls her on it. He asks Abraham, why did Sarah laugh? And then he asks this question, which is really the heart of the entire story. Is anything too hard for the Lord? Okay, so the meal's over, but the story is far from done. In fact, it's about to take a really dark and dramatic turn. 2 of the visitors head off towards Sodom, but the Lord stays behind to let Abraham in on a plan for judgment. He tells Abraham, look, the situation in Sodom and Gomorrah, it's bad. The sin is so great that he's come down to see if it's as bad as the reports say. This is when Abraham, knowing his nephew Lot is living right in the middle of it all, steps up and starts one of the boldest, most incredible negotiations you'll ever read. He starts high. Will you really sweep away the good guys with the bad? What if you find 50 righteous people in the city? And the Lord says, okay, for 50, I'll spare it. But Abraham is just getting started. He immediately pushes back. Hold on, what if there are just 5 less? What about 45? And again, the Lord agrees. The negotiation is on. Calling himself nothing more than dust and ashes, Abraham gets even bolder. He talks the number down to 40, and then to 30. And each time, with incredible patience, the Lord says yes. Finally, he makes his last desperate plea. Please don't be angry, he says, but just one more time. What if there are only 10? And the Lord gives his final answer. For the sake of 10, I will not destroy it. All right, so that's a story we all know. But now we're going to go back. Let's rewind to that one little detail that seemed so random at the time. Remember the flour, the 3 measures of flour? It turns out that might just be the key to the whole thing. So literally, it's just an ingredient for bread, but symbolically, it could represent something vast. Think about it. The Holy Family line, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, was destined to be a blessing to all the nations of the world, which biblically all trace their roots back to Noah's 3 sons. 3 measures of flour for the 3 branches of humanity. Now, you might be thinking, okay, that sounds like a bit of a stretch, but check this out. This isn't just some modern interpretation. Jesus himself uses this exact same imagery. He compares the kingdom of heaven to leaven hidden in, you guessed it, 3 measures of flour. That's not a coincidence, right? That's our Rosetta Stone for this whole chapter. Suddenly, the whole scene just unlocks. The woman in the parable, it's Sarah. The meal she prepares, it's not just lunch, it's a picture of communion with God. The leaven is the Holy Spirit, which works through the flour, Abraham's descendants, to slowly but surely transform and restore the entire world.
And this is where it gets really mind-blowing. The idea here is that Genesis 18 isn't just a historical event. It's a prophecy. It's like a sneak peek, a movie trailer for the entire sweep of human history, from Abraham all the way to the end of time. And once again, Jesus confirms this himself. In the Gospel of Luke, he says that when the Son of Man returns, it's going to be just like it was in the days of Lot. People will be going about their lives, eating, drinking, getting married, doing business, totally oblivious, right up until the moment judgment falls. So what does that mean? It means the meal Abraham shared with the Lord wasn't just about hospitality. It was a prophetic snapshot of a final communion, a great harvest of souls that will happen with the faithful right before the final judgment of the world. Okay, let's bring this all home. If this chapter is a prophecy and the meal is a final harvest, then who or what is the key to it all? What is this holy seed that makes redemption possible in the first place? The prophet Isaiah gives us this incredible image. He says that even when judgment comes and the land is like a tree that's been chopped down, a stump will remain. And that stump, he says, is the holy seed. It's this powerful promise that no matter how bad things look, something sacred will survive and regrow. And then Isaiah gets even more specific. He tells us this holy seed is a person, a righteous servant who will go through unimaginable suffering. And yet, through his anguish, he will make things right for many people because he will carry their sins himself. And here, it all clicks into place. Centuries later, Jesus is in a heated debate, and he says something that just stops everyone in their tracks. Your father Abraham rejoiced to see my day? And when they question him, he delivers the knockout punch. Before Abraham was, I am. He's not just saying he's a descendant, he's saying, I was there. I'm the one who visited him. He is the holy seed. So we're left with this final thought. If this ancient chapter really is a trailer for all of history, a promise of a final communion before a great judgment, and the holy seed at the center of it all is Jesus, well, what does that tell us about the final scene? It suggests history isn't just a random series of chaotic events. It's a story, one with a deliberate plot, heading towards a final redemptive climax that was planned from the very beginning.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. We are taking a bit of a shortcut today, right into a text that has shaped civilizations for thousands of years. We're looking at a single chapter from the book of Genesis.
From Genesis 18.
Right, Genesis 18. And our mission here is to approach this not as, a dense religious lesson, but as a foundational story, a kind of roadmap, especially if you've never really opened these sources before.
That is the perfect way to frame it,
Yeah.
because this one chapter, it really reads like a trailer for the entire history of humanity. I mean, it's all here.
What do you mean it's all here?
You get the divine promise that kicks everything off. You get this really profound symbolic meal, and then a massive lesson about justice and, well, judgment. It's an incredibly dense piece of writing.
Okay, let's get into it then. So the core of the story, it involves a patriarch named Abraham. He's kind of the starting point for this whole tradition.
Right. Him, his wife Sarah, who is very, very old, and then 3 mysterious visitors who just show up.
And the setting itself is so vivid. It says Abraham is just sitting at the entrance of his tent during, the hottest part of the day.
The heat of the day, yeah.
He looks up, and there are 3 men standing nearby. Now, here's a crucial detail. The text doesn't say he walked. It says he runs to greet them.
Runs, and immediately bows to the ground. He's showing this immense respect, calling one of them, my lord, and he's basically begging them to stop and rest.
That urgency, that humility, it really says a lot about the culture, doesn't it? This isn't just a casual, hey, want some water?
No, not at all. It's a desperate insistence. He insists they rest under the specific tree, wash their feet, and then he orchestrates this huge sudden feast.
And the details of the prep are so specific, which I find fascinating. He goes to Sarah and tells her to rush. Take 3 abundant measures of the best flour.
The best flour.
Yeah, and bake bread. And 3 measures, that isn't just a snack. That's like industrial scale baking for 3 guys.
Exactly. And Abraham, he doesn't just delegate everything.
Yeah.
He himself runs to the flock, he picks out a tender calf, and he makes sure they have yogurt and milk.
So he's the host, the chef, the head waiter, all of it.
All of it. And he stands by them, serving them under the tree. It's a picture of perfect hospitality.
So after the meal, the conversation, it turns very personal. The visitors ask him, where is Sarah, your wife?
And then one of them, who you quickly realize is no ordinary traveler, makes this just impossible statement. He says, I will return to see you within a year, and your wife Sarah will have a son.
Which is the core of the drama, right? Because Sarah is inside the tent. She's listening to all this.
Right, and the text is very clear. Both she and Abraham are extremely old. I mean, way, way past the age of having children.
So what does she do?
She laughs
Yeah.
silently to herself. She's thinking, how could a worn-out woman like me enjoy something like this, especially when my husband is also this old? It's pure human skepticism.
It's a completely understandable reaction.
Totally. But the revelation that comes next is immediate. And frankly, it's chilling. The visitor, who the text now identifies as the Lord, he immediately challenges Abraham.
He asks him why she laughed.
Yeah, why did Sarah laugh? And then he asks that massive, powerful question. Is anything too difficult for the Lord?
And Sarah, of course, is terrified. She denies it. I didn't laugh.
But the Lord just says, it is not true. Yes, you laughed. It completely establishes his authority. He knows her innermost thoughts. He knows what's hidden.
So what's so fascinating here is that this whole scene, this hospitality preamble, it seems to contain the seeds for the entire plan laid out in these sources.
The symbolic seed, no pun intended. And our notes really draw your attention back to that one super specific detail.
The 3 abundant measures of flour.
The 3 measures of flour.
That's where we kind of pivot from just telling the story to the real synthesis of this deep dive.
Yeah.
Because the sources draw a direct line from that detail to the later teachings of Yeshua, or Jesus, centuries later.
Exactly. He used that exact ancient measurement in one of his parables. He said the kingdom of heaven is like leaven-like yeast that a woman put in,
Put 3 measures of flour.
3 measures of flour until it permeated the whole mass. He's using the same specific 3-part measurement from Abraham's tent.
Wait, hold on. Why 3, though? Why that number? And what does the flour even represent in this analogy?
Well, the flour, which is being prepared by the woman Sarah in the original story, our sources interpret that as a symbol for communion, for, reconciliation with the Creator.
It's the raw material for fellowship.
Precisely. And the 3 measures are seen as representing the whole world, which, in that tradition, was categorized by the 3 sons of Noah, who were believed to be the ancestors of all nations.
So this isn't just about baking bread. This is a massive global blueprint. Abraham was promised a son, Isaac, who was the physical seed.
Right. And that seed, his lineage, was destined to mix among all the nations. The 3 measures of flour. The seed is the leaven.
So the leaven is Abraham's spiritual influence, meant to spread through all of humanity to establish this kingdom of heaven.
Exactly. And it was meant to restore the communion that the sources say was broken by humanity's idolatry, most famously at the Tower of Babel, when everyone tried to build their way to heaven on their own terms.
So it's this huge rescue plan, and it's launched right there from a meal in a tent. The sources say this required Abraham's descendants to live by the Spirit, to prioritize spirituality over, temporary worldly things.
Which is the perfect context for what happens next. The entire narrative just pivots on a dime.
Right. The meal's over, the impossible promise is made, and then the men stand up and look directly toward the city of Sodom.
And this is where you see that immediate link between divine promise and divine justice. The Lord reveals his plans to destroy Sodom to Abraham.
And he says why? Right. He says he chose Abraham to form a great nation and to order his family to stay on the path of the Lord, doing what is correct and just.
Yes. Because Abraham is charged with justice, he gets insight into judgment. It's this connection between covenant and consequence.
And the reason for focusing on Sodom is that he'd heard a great clamor. The sin there was described as very grave.
He's very clear. He says, I will go down to see if their actions are as wicked as the reports. It's an investigation. It's perfect justice, not just a whim.
And this sets the stage for one of the most incredible scenes, Abraham's intercession, the bargaining scene.
It's so bold. He just walks up to the Lord and questions the integrity of the whole plan. Like, are you really going to destroy the righteous along with the wicked?
He challenges the judge of all the earth to do what's right. It's stunning.
And what you get is this extraordinary negotiation. It shows the mercy that's inherent in the judgment. First, the Lord agrees to spare the whole city for 50 righteous people.
And Abraham just keeps pushing. He says, what about 45?
45, then 40, then 30, then 20. He keeps pushing the boundary of mercy.
And he finally lands on 10. Just 10 righteous people. And the Lord agrees, for the sake of just 10, he won't destroy the city.
It's a remarkable insight. It shows that even a tiny remnant of righteousness can, potentially avert a catastrophe.
So what does this whole Sodom episode mean in the bigger picture that the sources are painting?
Well, the sources draw a straight line from Sodom to later prophetic warnings. The destruction isn't just a one-off historical event. It becomes a template
A template for what?
for the end times. The return of the Son of Man, it's compared to the days of Noah. People were eating, drinking, getting married, just normal life, until the flood came.
And it's also paralleled with Lot's time in Sodom. They were eating, drinking, buying, selling, farming, building.
Just absolute total normalcy, the daily grind, until fire and sulfur rained down and destroyed them all. The picture it paints is that judgment disrupts routine life right when it seems most normal.
This all connects back to the fulfillment of that promise made to Sarah in the tent, doesn't it?
It all culminates in the final overarching theme. The ultimate purpose of this whole plan is the holy seed.
We know the seed starts with Isaac, but the sources go deeper. They suggest that before the final judgment, there's going to be another kind of communal meal.
A celebration, yeah, a communion with the spiritual descendants of Abraham and Sarah, with this great joy over seeing the abundance of the promised fruit.
And to explain how this plan survives, through all of history, through all the ups and downs, the sources use this powerful image from the prophet Isaiah, the idea of the scump or the remnant.
Right, think of a huge tree, an oak that gets cut down, destroyed. All that's left is the trunk, the stump.
So the prophecy says that even if judgment sweeps through and only a tenth of the people are left, and even if that gets destroyed again,
The core remains. The lineage survives because, and this is the key phrase, the holy seed will be the trunk. It's the guarantee that the promise won't fail no matter what happens.
and the sources don't just leave that as an abstract idea. They explicitly identify who the holy seed is.
They do. They link it back to the very person who made the promise in the tent. In the book of John, Yeshua is quoted saying that Abraham himself rejoiced to see his day.
This is where it all comes together, really, when people challenge him, saying, how could you have seen Abraham? He lived thousands of years ago.
He replies with that profound, ancient statement of identity. I tell you the truth, even before Abraham was born, I am.
Which is the same name for God used throughout the ancient texts. It's presented as the ultimate fulfillment of that promise made to Sarah.
But that fulfillment required suffering. The prophecy in Isaiah says it was part of the divine good plan to crush him, to cause him pain. But
when his life is given as an offering for sin, he will have many descendants and a long life.
the outcome is synthesized perfectly. Through his suffering, my righteous servant will make it possible for many to be counted among the righteous, because he will bear all their sins.
So the purpose of the physical seed, the son promised to Sarah, culminates in the spiritual seed, who opens the way for everyone to be counted as righteous.
And this whole arc, this whole deep dive, from a tent in the desert to a final act of salvation, it's all anchored by the condition of the covenant made right there in Genesis 18.
Let's remind everyone what that was.
The Lord chose Abraham so that all nations would be blessed through him on one condition, provided he orders his children and his family to maintain the path of the Lord by doing what is correct and just. The blessing is always tied to righteousness.
Which leaves us with a final provocative thought for you. Our sources strongly suggest that this generation is uniquely positioned to see the fulfillment of these prophecies, paralleling the days of Noah and Lot, a time of total normalcy suddenly disrupted. So, given what we've unpacked today about judgment and the remnant and the path of justice, what change in your perspective do you need to make to ensure you are counted among those who are doing what is correct and just? Use this knowledge to continue your own deep dive.